Did you know that Christopher Columbus almost discovered Florida? I mean, almost as in he was so close, he could have practically felt the humidity. Yeah, this is one of those moments in history where you think, how different would things have been if he just sailed a little further north? Welcome to Old Florida Now. I'm your host, Bo Carter, and today we're diving into one of those fascinating what if moments from history. You know, Columbus gets a lot of credit and plenty of blame for his voyages, but when it comes to Florida, he missed the mark. He came close, so close, but he didn't quite make it. So how did Columbus almost discover the Sunshine State? What led him to veer off just shy of our beloved peninsula? Today, we're going to dig into the twists, turns, and a bit of bad luck that kept Columbus from stumbling upon Florida. And trust me, it's a story full of surprises. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll have a whole new perspective on Columbus's journey and how Florida could have been part of his legacy.
Welcome to Old Florida Now, where we uncover the rich history and hidden stories of the Sunshine State. Each episode will explore the people, places, and events that shaped Florida's past. Let's dive in.
So Columbus, right? We all know he was obsessed with finding this westward sea route to Asia. But what most people don't realize is that this obsession was kind of based on some pretty faulty math. Like the guy thought the Earth's circumference was way smaller than it actually is. Now, Columbus had this vision, let's call it. He was convinced he could just sail west and boom, he'd hit the Indies, no problem. I mean, the logic wasn't completely off, but his numbers were. He really thought the journey across the Atlantic was going to be a breeze, and spoiler alert, it wasn't. So here's the kicker. Columbus needed cash, a lot of cash, and after getting turned down by other European courts, it's Spain that finally steps in. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, they were interested, let's say, in expanding their empire, you know, spreading Catholicism, planting that Spanish flag in new lands. They were like, sure, Columbus, go find us some spices and riches. Just don't mess it up. But instead of reaching Asia, our guy Columbus ends up cruising around the Caribbean, which, to be fair, is still a big deal. But Florida, it was right there. Like, he was so close. Spain had this big goal of expanding the empire, and Florida was definitely in the cards at some point. But in 1492, Columbus just missed it. He's hanging out in the Bahamas and Cuba, probably thinking, yeah, I'm on the right track, while Florida's just chilling a little north, waiting to be discovered. Crazy, right? Like, just a few more miles, and maybe Columbus would have stumbled onto what we now know as the Sunshine State. So let's talk about Columbus's first big voyage, the one we all kind of know about, right? This is 1492. He set sail with his 3 ships, the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, on what he thinks is going to be this straightforward route to Asia. But spoiler alert, that's not where he ends up. Now, on October 12th, 1492, Columbus and his crew finally spot land after weeks at sea, and they make landfall in the Bahamas. Yeah, the Bahamas, not quite Asia, but they don't know that yet. He names this island San Salvador, and for a while, he's probably thinking, all right, we're getting close. You know, just living his best explorer life, completely unaware he's not even in the ballpark of his original plan. But here's where it gets interesting. After chilling in the Bahamas, Columbus keeps sailing around the Caribbean. He hits up Cuba, checks out Hispaniola, and completely misses Florida. I mean, it's right there. Like, if he had just gone a little more north, he could have stumbled onto it, but nope, he stays south, thinking he's still on the right track to the Indies. So yeah, Florida was right in his reach, but Columbus never ventured up that way on this first trip. Crazy to think how different things might have been if he just made a slight detour. So Columbus goes back for round 2, his second voyage, this time in 1493, and it's a bigger deal. He's got more ships, more crew, and more pressure to actually bring back some results, right? Now, this time around, he's not messing around in just one spot. He's all over the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands. He's checking out some prime real estate. But again, no Florida. You'd think after all that sailing, he might have gone a little further north, right? But for whatever reason, Columbus just sticks to the southern parts of the Caribbean. He never ventures close enough to the Florida coast. It's kind of wild when you think about it because he's so close, but it's like it just wasn't on his radar. Now, part of the issue, besides his obsession with finding the Indies, is that back then, navigational tools were, let's just say, limited. I mean, they had basic stuff like compasses and stars, but they didn't have GPS, and geography was not exactly their strong suit. Maps were, let's just say, a bit off. So you can imagine how easy it was for them to miss key spots like, an entire peninsula. So yeah, during his second voyage, Columbus explores more islands, but Florida still not on the list. All right, so by now, Columbus has been out there a couple times, right? He's already not exactly found Asia. But hey, he's still not giving up. So on his third voyage in 1498, he's at it again, thinking he's going to hit the Indies. This time, though, he ends up in Venezuela. Yeah, Venezuela, which, again, isn't exactly Florida or Asia, but, close enough, right? But even then, Columbus doesn't seem to have that let's go north instinct. He's sticking to this more southern route, probably still thinking he's on the edge of Asia or something. So no Florida again. Now, by the fourth voyage, which, by the way, is in 1502, he's really just trying to find any new routes or more land to claim. This time he's hanging out around Central America. You've got him checking out places like Honduras and Panama. And it's impressive, but he never ventures north enough to get a glimpse of Florida. I mean, Florida's right there along the Gulf of Mexico coast, but he's still keeping his focus south. You got to wonder what might have happened if he just turned the ships a little more northward. But nope, Florida stays undiscovered by Columbus. Honestly, it's kind of wild how many times he came this close, but just missed it. All right, so here's the big question. Why didn't Columbus ever discover Florida? I mean, he was so close, right? Well, let's break it down because it's a mix of bad math and just being a little too focused on the wrong target. First off, back in the day, navigational tools weren't exactly advanced. Like Columbus was sailing with a compass and some maps that were honestly way off. He thought the Earth was a lot smaller than it actually is. So when he set sail, he was fully convinced that by going west, he'd hit Asia and, the Indies, gold, spices, the whole deal. But the thing is, he was so laser focused on finding Asia that he just kept exploring the Caribbean and South America, thinking, oh yeah, I'm close. Florida? Psh, it wasn't even on his radar. He was convinced that these islands down south were getting him closer to his goal. Then there's the whole geographical aspect. Florida, as we know, sits further north, and Columbus never really veered in that direction. He stuck to the southern routes through the Caribbean and Central America. And Florida just stayed, undiscovered by him. On top of that, there were plenty of geographical barriers, reefs, tricky currents, things that honestly probably didn't make it easy to just stumble onto Florida. Plus, Columbus was so wrapped up in his quest to find a passage to Asia, he might have just completely overlooked the idea of heading north. So yeah, between the misconceptions about the size of the Earth and his fixation on the Indies, Florida was just one of those places he missed. All right, so here's where things get interesting. Just a few years after Columbus's death, another Spanish explorer picks up the baton and finally finds Florida. That guy, Juan Ponce de Leon. Now, Ponce de Leon was no stranger to the New World. He had actually been with Columbus on one of his voyages and had a pretty solid understanding of the lands Columbus explored. But in 1513, Ponce de Leon sets out on his own journey looking for new territories, and boom, he lands on what we now call Florida. He wasn't out there looking for Asia like Columbus. He was more interested in expanding Spain's influence and maybe finding a little something extra. You've probably heard the legend about him searching for the Fountain of Youth. Whether or not that's true, what we do know is that Ponce de Leon's discovery of Florida extended Spain's reach into this new territory. In a way, Ponce de Leon was building on Columbus's groundwork. Columbus had mapped out parts of the Caribbean, and now Ponce de Leon was taking it a step further, pushing north and solidifying Spain's claim on the mainland. It's kind of funny when you think about it. Columbus was so close, but it's Ponce de Leon who actually makes the big discovery just a few years later. So here's a fun little twist about Columbus. The guy wasn't just driven by, the idea of finding riches and new trade routes. He actually believed his voyages were divinely inspired. Yeah, he saw himself as kind of a chosen one on a mission to spread Christianity. That's part of why he was so motivated. Like, God's got my back on this. I'm going to find something big. It definitely played a role in his decision making throughout those journeys. Now, this next bit, it's pretty wild. At one point, Columbus starts thinking the Earth isn't just round; it's shaped like a pear. I'm not kidding. He had this whole theory that the Earth bulged out near the top like the stem of a pear, and that's why he hadn't found Asia yet. Never mind all the evidence piling up that he was nowhere near Asia. He just kept clinging to this idea. The guy was really convinced he was close. And here's a cool one. Columbus, he wasn't above using a little sky magic to impress the locals. He had some basic navigational tools, like an astrolabe to track the stars. But the real kicker, he used eclipses to manipulate people. There's this story where he's stranded in Jamaica and the indigenous folks are kind of done helping him out. So Columbus checks his almanac, sees there's a lunar eclipse coming up, and tells them that his God is angry and going to darken the moon. Sure enough, the eclipse happens, and they're freaked out, basically begging him to ask his God for forgiveness. Genius move, honestly. So even though Columbus never quite made it to Florida, his expedition still laid the groundwork for what came next. I mean, think about it. Without Columbus charting those early maps and claiming new territories, future explorers like Juan Ponce de Leon wouldn't have had a starting point for their journeys. In a way, Columbus missing Florida was like setting up the pieces for the next big discovery. And honestly, history's full of those almost moments, right? It's kind of fascinating to look at how many close encounters and near misses have shaped the world. These little twists of fate, like Columbus sailing just south of Florida, ended up changing the course of history in ways he probably couldn't have imagined. So, yeah, even when things don't go exactly as planned, those missed discoveries still have a ripple effect. It's a reminder that in exploration and in life, sometimes the biggest impacts come from the paths we almost take. All right, folks, that's all for today's episode. Thanks for hanging out with me here on Old Florida Now. If you like this deep dive into Florida's almost discovery, make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you next time with another story from Florida's wild history. Stay curious, y'all.
Thanks for listening to Old Florida Now. Stay tuned for more stories from the Sunshine State's past. Until next time.